Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Inspiring Inclusion Women on Boards event. I'm Phoebe Watson, the manager of the company secretarial recruitment team for Hayes, and selfishly wanted to hear more about this topic. So, very glad it's of interest to all of our attendees today. At Hayes, we have a brilliant culture of inclusion and celebrate International Women's Day with vigour. But we want to take this opportunity to hear from those that we may not get the pleasure of hearing from in any other capacity. My team and I have a phenomenal track record of placing women into senior roles that have led them to their seat at the boardroom. Despite the gender split not yet being where it needs to be, we pride ourselves on doing our part to ensure an equitable process throughout. We've teamed up with CBRE a couple of times for some brilliant event topics such as ESG, Section 172 and AI, which have all been a marked success. I'm looking forward to hearing more today from our brilliant panelists. So without delay, I'll pass over to Raman, who will guide us through the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoebe and Hayes, for so generously hosting this event, which is allowing us to bring together colleagues from across the governance sector, across the world, to mark International Women's Day 24. So my own journey in governance and as a company sec started around 8 years ago. However, I originally trained as a solicitor. I know this path can be a segue for some. However, today we have attendees who have accessed the governance world from many different joining points and at different stages in their careers. During this time, I've been a secretary on many boards in different frameworks, from regulated industries to PLCs. My observation is that whilst women do appear on boards, they are usually a minority. There is no doubt that lots of reviews like the Davies and Hampton-Alexander reviews pushing for quotas certainly helped to balance gender diversity and thought diversity, and helped for women to be in senior leader positions and having direct reports. My own company, CBRE, has a fantastic inclusion culture, and we also have a senior appointed culture secretary on the exec board. Today, we have with us 4 distinguished panelists. The format of this meeting is virtual, and the chat box will be open for questions. A recording will be made available afterwards. So firstly, may I introduce to you Tanya Gass. Tanya specialises in talent acquisition for non-executive positions, and she was also the co-founder of Women on Boards, Matching Women with Net Opportunities. Then may I introduce Elisabetta Bayliss, COO for Hayes Enterprise Solution Division. Elisabetta has had extensive career progression within Hayes and will speak on the skill set which has helped her on this journey to her division's executive committee board. Then we have Sadia Salam, a former lawyer turned executive coach with a passion for championing inclusion in the workplace for women. Sadia will speak to us on toolkits that can help us to be our authentic selves. Then we have our very own Joanna Cobbetts-Scott. She is our CBRE Learning and Talent Director, and she will speak to us on emotional intelligence. So to kick us off now, I will hand over to Tanya to speak on the board role and the market. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you. So as introduced, and thank you very much for that, I am a headhunter. I'm partner and head of board practice at Norman Broadbent, and we're quite a broad practice. So we're not a boutique. We cover all sectors, all functions, all types and sizes of business in that board practice. And I personally am sector agnostic, so I will do any sector roles, but always non-exec level chairs, and occasionally I do a little bit of legal practice work as well. My background, as mentioned, is from Women on Boards, where I co-founded the bespoke search service, so trying to connect the female membership of 10,000 women on boards with non-exec positions. But historically, I have been a governance professional, so governance is absolutely in my blood. And originally I started off as a corporate lawyer, so had somewhat of a squiggly career, but I think the common theme has been working with boards right from the outset. So I imagine many of you are perhaps thinking about a non-exec career, and that's why you're here in this webinar. You're thinking, is it for you? Or you might have decided, absolutely, this is for me. This is what I'm looking to do either now or potentially in the future. And perhaps some of you already have non-exec roles, and of course those can be in all sorts of sectors and types of business. If you are thinking, is this for me? Should I be looking at non-exec and the reasons for that? Then you need to have a really clear understanding of your board readiness, and what you're offering to a board. Why should they want you on the board? How are you additive? And it's really important to have that clarity of why you're seeking a board role. It's a really difficult market. It's very saturated. Just to give you an idea, I joined Norman Broadbent in August last year, and I think I have spoken to at least 380 non-exec candidates and probably turned away at least another 600 who'd like to talk to me. If I talked to everybody who wanted to be on my radar, obviously I wouldn't win any work, and that would be no good for anyone. But it just gives you an idea of how saturated the market is. A lot of people want to be a non-exec. Now, I don't say that to put people off. I say it to make sure that everyone understands that this is a market that's very busy, and there are far more candidates than there are roles. So if you are looking for this, you have to take an approach that's a lot like a project, going after the sorts of roles that will suit you, understanding your value add, understanding your pitch, and working through the process, with that real sort of intelligence project mindset. The other thing to understand, I think, at the outset is what is it that you're going to be doing as a non-exec? Because it's not for everyone. It's not a role that suits every personality. And you'll probably have heard lots of old adages about being a critical friend, having noses in, fingers out. It's very different to an operational role, because you're really thinking, how can I help and assist and guide the executive team and bring a different perspective and a different viewpoint, but without getting involved in the doing. So the role of the non-exec typically, and of course it varies across different types of businesses, is thinking about long-term success, thinking about the different interests of various stakeholders and who are those stakeholders, constructively challenging, developing proposals on strategy and direction of business, but without getting too much into the nitty-gritty, providing independent oversight, scrutinizing management performance, but again, that sort of critical friend mindset, assessing the integrity of financial information, making sure you feel very assured that the right frameworks are in place. Of course, you might be involved in succession for the executive and for the board in determining executive remuneration. And last but not least, of course, governance, and ensuring that regulatory obligations are met. However, governance is a little bit of a dirty word, and I'm sure a lot of us know this. Governance is essential, and that's what the non-exec board is there to do. But not really does anyone ever come to a headhunter and say, do you know what I need is someone with governance understanding. It's a little bit when you go to a lawyer, a little bit like when you go to a lawyer and you say, I'd need someone who understands the law. Well, that's a given. That's part of the job. It's what else can you add? So although governance is essential, it's not really what boards then want to focus on in terms of who they're looking for. So understanding what boards want and what you're there to do is really important, but also your motivations and ambitions and why do you want a role. As I mentioned, it's a saturated market. It's not an easy job, and it's getting increasingly hard, as no doubt you're all aware, with director attestations at PLC level, for example, and it carries personal risk. So it's worth being very aware of that. I suppose what people want to know most of all when they talk to me is what are we looking for? What do headhunters want, and how do you stand out? And it depends what stage you're talking about. So I wanted to sort of very briefly walk through, what the various stages are in that exec process typically. And of course, the first step is getting noticed at all. So how do you get noticed? It's predominantly LinkedIn. So headhunters will map the market fresh every single time from LinkedIn, looking for those key attributes that are in the brief. So you need to have that clarity in your LinkedIn profile. Of course, the other part of the equation is, are you already known? So have you already sent over a CV? And headhunters store that information in a database. I personally have talent pools where I put people's CVs in there, and I will search within those talent pools as well as mapping on LinkedIn. And of course, the other very important way of getting attention is through the network. So if a board comes to us asking for a non-exec, they quite often have their own ideas of who we might want to approach as well, and they get fed into the process. So getting attention through that means it is really important. So there's kind of three ways, and you should do all of those. So that's the getting noticed bit. The next stage is your CV. And what's absolutely fundamental in a CV is clarity. And what I look for, or hope to look for, or find in a CV are 5 S's. So I want to see seniority very clearly. It's not always obvious in different organisations, as I'm sure you're aware. Is a director, where does that sit? Is it -2? Is it -1? Who do you report to? How many direct reports do you have? That is vital information. So that's the first one, seniority. Then sector. Which sectors have you worked in? What sorts of sector experience do you have? Scale. So the size of the business. Don't assume that someone knows what the business is, what it does, what size it is, and also the ownership type of the business. Is it PE backed? Is it family backed? Is it a listed company? So seniority, sector, scale, and then skill set, of course. So the sorts of skills that you bring, and then situational experience. And by that, I mean, have you been through an M&A? Have you divested of a business? Have you had to reorganize, restructure, go through a transformation? All of those types of situations. And the reason I mention these 5 S's is because that is what the client is asking us for in the brief, and that's what we are testing with them in the brief. And so what you want to do really is match the client's requests. So I hope that structure helps in terms of setting out your CV and matching a brief. Then the next stage, of course, is, let's say you have got noticed, you have sent through your CV, and you now are talking to the researcher. And that's usually the first point of contact with a headhunter, is you talk to the researcher, then you talk to someone like myself, the consultant, and then you talk to the client. And I think in all of those points, you need to be cognizant of the fact that those are interviews, and you're representing your multifaceted skill set and matching to the brief. And I suppose, to sort of finish off what I'm talking about here, what I'm seeing more of is that we want to have people who have multifaceted attributes. So it's not just someone who comes from legal, it's not just someone who has a governance background, but what can you offer on ESG? What do you know about AI? Because boards don't have enough room to have one person sort of fitting each of those categories. You need that multifaceted attribute. Hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Lots to think about there. Now we will move on to Elisabetta, please, and about your journey of self-development.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. And I'm here to tell the story of my professional journey to the UK and Ireland Board of Hays. And I'm sure most of you know us. We're a specialist recruitment company. My journey actually started in 1988. That's 35 years ago. And I joined a technical recruitment desk. Now, imagine the scene. I could barely speak English. I was born and raised in Italy. And I'm sat here trying to recruit engineers using all sorts of different instruments. The terminology itself was a struggle. And I started as with no experience, a trainee. And I absolutely loved the job from day one. I was entirely in my element, talking to people every day, making a difference to their lives by finding them a new job. I couldn't think of anything more rewarding. by nature, I'm quite inquisitive and particularly wanted to learn from early days how businesses are run. So I remember being awfully intrigued by, seeing people walk into private meetings, team meetings, office meetings. I was massively curious about what are they talking about? What is being discussed? Is that the room where the decisions are made? So I aspired to being part of that conversation, but how was I going to get there? Well, I don't have to tell you all, I'm sure, how hard work and dedication pays. So of course, as time went on, I started getting invited to such meetings, and every time I made it into one group, be it the team meeting, I then wanted to be in the office meeting, and then the area meeting, and then the regional meeting, and always wanted the next seat at the next table up on the ladder. And to be honest, I always felt a really good mix of, trepidation and excitement as I'm joining a new group. I was always over-prepared, never got to say all the things I wanted to say, but at least I was there. Looking back, if I'm honest, the early meetings focused on reporting. There was a lot of talk about what had worked, what lessons we learned, and sharing experiences. And it wasn't until I was asked to take Hayes to Italy, taking you back some years now. This is the early 2000s, and I realized that it was then that I actually learned to make business decisions. So my input wasn't just reporting and sharing, but became decision making. Of course, being Italian, as I mentioned, helped me. I understood the culture. But what I was exposed to was a very different set of priorities. So many more aspects of my job came into play, literally from choosing furniture for the new office to having to sign employment contracts with customers, and so on. Now that was, I felt, a very good grounding, and really going from being part of a very well supported large structure in the UK and Ireland, which is where Hayes really started, to being out in Milan with little support, having to understand each aspect of the business we were trying to build. That was exceptionally good grounding for me. But the curiosity about moving upwards and on to the next level of meeting, let's say, I never faded. And I finally, with different roles and back in the UK business, I finally got a seat on the Hayes UK and Ireland board. And back to that apprehension, trepidation, whatever you like to call it, that I was telling you about earlier. Well, that was right there. And I might have been a little bit timid to begin with, probably said a lot of the wrong things, but hey, it didn't take that long to feel at home. And as you start feeling at home with a group, you actually begin to understand the purpose. And what became clear is that although I had joined a group where decisions were made, I also discovered that that was the place where other people's ideas were discussed. I realized that as a board member, you don't have all the answers. Far from it. In fact, a lot of the time, the group doesn't have the answers, but you know where to find them. And that the role is more about encouraging conversations when the answers can be found, facilitating and creating an atmosphere where creativity can thrive. So whilst I'm really fortunate to be part of the decision-making group of my organization, I equally know now that my ideas, my contribution was there the whole way through, all the way through my career, taking about 35 years. Clearly, my sphere of influence grew, but my voice was heard the whole time at a different level. So what I wanted to share with you is what I believe I've learned, which is you don't have to be on the board to influence the direction of the business you work for. And I'm going to share with you 2 data points. We ran a recent survey, and we found that 52% of respondents said that they aspired to holding a board level position. Yet, if I look at our organisation, we are 3,500 staff in the UK. There are only 8 seats on the board. So there's going to be an awful lot of very disappointed people. But now consider this, because we also ask, who do you think has the most influence in your organisation? Probably unsurprisingly, 32% said the CEO. But then maybe surprising, but certainly encouraging, the next highest at 30%, the answer was all the staff. So a third of respondents stated that all the staff that have the most influence in an organisation. I found that really heartening. I believe that wholly, and I guess that supports my personal experience. So my conclusion is that your excellent ideas, your creativity, your imagination are most likely seen and appreciated, even if you don't have a seat at the table. So don't be disappointed. 3,500 people in Hayes, 8 people on the board. Not everyone's going to get there, but don't be discouraged by it. Find the motivation in knowing that your contribution is not less valuable, and that the impact that you have and you will have had throughout your career is important and is meaningful, even if you don't get to the top of your organisation. Before I finish, I just wanted to leave you with one more thought, because I feel that there are other ways to make a difference within an organisation, and perhaps considering the very popular employee networks. We have several at Hayes, where you can really express your views and have a very influential role, is just as important. So being part of these networks, these days they have rotating chairs, but certainly participation at all levels is wholly encouraged, can actually be very instrumental in influencing a more inclusive culture, more diverse thinking, and more equitable environments. So get involved. And maybe the final line I will leave you with, that in my opinion, it doesn't have to be a linear route to the top of the organisation to provide you with the recognition and the fulfillment that you deserve. Look at other ways. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really interesting to hear about how a lot of roles require that commercial acumen and problem solving. And that's how you kind of got to where you were. Also building upon what Tanya had said about, specific niches, focusing on AI or ESG and bringing skill set, specific knowledge, skill set, problem solving skill set to board in a very saturated market. Thank you. So we are now going to move on over to Sadia, who will talk about culture and acceptance and inclusion as part of this journey. Over to you, Sadia.
Thank you. It's great to be here this afternoon, everyone, and it was great to hear Tanya and Elisabetta. So I didn't realise that Tanya was a corporate lawyer, another recovering lawyer. So I'm a recovering lawyer. I was 20 years as a corporate lawyer before setting up my executive coaching and inclusion business, which I run, and I work with senior women helping them get into senior positions. And I loved what Elisabetta said. It's not all about getting onto the board. You can have influence and be in those senior leadership positions in very different ways. And it's great to hear that. But helping women get to those positions, whatever's right for them, and helping them stay there. Because of course, when we get to those senior positions, we want to stay there. So we need to be able to lead in a way that works for us and our organizations. And that's the work that I do. And today I really want to talk about the journey onto boards. So there's the before, there's the during, there's the after. And I've also got some asks for the allies on this webinar today, because we're all in this together to support everyone together. And before I start, I always like to mention, I do a lot of talking about what's going on the inside for us women. I talk a lot about the internal machine, not because there's anything wrong, but just because we don't talk about that as much. We don't talk about what's going on for us internally. We talk about externally, but not enough about the internal. So that's what I want to talk about today. And when I talk about it to educate them so that we can use it in a powerful way. What I am definitely not doing is fixing anything. Women are not broken. There is nothing to fix. There's more things we need to know about ourselves, but I am not fixing anything. And I really want to stress that today. So if we talk about the before we go for those roles on boards or those senior positions, it's really important to know, what are our thoughts about it? I know for a fact that in my career, when I was going for anything senior or anything new, I'd have this voice in my head telling me, oh no, you're not ready. You're not an expert. You'll never get it. You've got no time for this. You'll be rubbish at it. You're not good enough. I'd have all those thoughts going on. And there was a time when I just thought, okay, it's just not my time. Because I'd listened to those thoughts and I believed them. And I know now that that was the voice of my inner critic. And I've named my inner critic Zelda. So that was the voice of Zelda. And she used to come up a lot. And I used to have these thoughts a lot of what I couldn't do. And I spent a lot of time with what I couldn't do and try and disprove her and think, no, I can go for this. A lot of time and energy was wasted doing that. Now I accept Zelda for who she is. And we need our inner critics, because the inner critic is that part of us that stops us jumping into fires, stops us jumping off bridges. So we do need them. It's there and it's part of us, but it doesn't define us. It's okay having those thoughts, but it's also important to know that you can challenge those thoughts. And it's not about disproving those thoughts. It's about saying, well, okay, my inner critic is saying this, saying that I'm not expert enough, I'm not good enough, I'm never going to get. Look, I just heard what Tanya said. It's a saturated market. It's never going to be me. I'm never going to get it. That's exactly what Zelda was saying to me when I heard that, because that's the way she works. And I know that now. So I challenge her and I think, actually, I'm going to have a chat to somebody, to another part of me, and that's my inner champion. What's my inner champion got to say? My inner champion tells me about all the experience I do have, tells me what I do have to offer when I join a board. And we need to have that conversation with all the parts of us. We've got this internal machine going on, but we're in control of that. And it's important that we understand the internal machine and we have the right conversations. So we have the right conversations with our inner critic and our inner champion. And it's really important to have that conversation. And there's also the before part is, what are our thoughts? Because it's much easier when you're filling in your CV or you're looking at roles to do that from the shoes of your inner champion rather than the shoes of your inner critic. You'll turn up in a very different way. You'll have a very different CV if you stand in the shoes of your inner champion. It's really important to have that as a tool. But also, often I hear from a lot of women, especially women of colour, when they get approached for roles on boards is am I just the token hire? Are they just coming to me because I'm a woman? Are they just coming to me because I'm a woman of colour? Do they really want me on that board? I hear that a lot. And my answer to that is, what's the opportunity here? What's the role on the board? Is it for you? Can you add something? Because if you can, I would never let the fact that I'm a woman, and in particular a woman of colour, stop me from going for something. My inner critic is telling me don't go for it. But I know that I can challenge that thought. And I raise that today because that's a point that comes up time and time again when I'm working with women who are going for board positions is, do they really want me? And the answer is yes. They really do. They need you. And that's why they've come to you. And I always look at it in that way. So that's the journey before. Then what happens when you get that position and you are on the board? The things I often hear when people actually get onto boards is, oh my gosh, I'm the only one. I'm the first. I'm not listened to, or this is too hard. And I always challenge that. And I think, well, what's going on for them? What's going on for these women? And actually, what's going on for me? I remember going into my board meetings the first time that I went into them. How did I feel? And there's a concept that I always talk about, and that's the concept of an invisible rucksack. So in my 20-year career, I felt that I was really climbing this mountain. And things were said to me in meetings. I was spoken over, I was ignored, or I said something, somebody else said it, and they would get the credit for it. All these different experiences would happen. And you wouldn't talk about it because you're so focused on just climbing that mountain and just keep moving on and getting to the top and serving and giving those amazing views that you have and doing an amazing job. That's what I was focused on. And I didn't realize that on that journey, all those experiences, I was just putting into my invisible rucksack. So by the time I got to the top of my mountain and I got to that board table and I got to those meetings, I was exhausted. And I had this invisible rucksack on my back. So every time somebody spoke, I'd immediately think, oh, are they going to speak over me? Do they really want me to speak? And I'd have this internal dialogue going on. And I thought, why am I doing that and no one else? And through coaching, I've learned that I've got this invisible rucksack. And so when we go into these meetings, it's really important to not make it wrong that you've got an invisible rucksack. We often do. There's nothing wrong with that. But know when to take it off. Know that we can take that invisible rucksack off. Take the weight of it. Know that there's lots of gifts in that invisible rucksack that we can unpack when we've got more time to do so. And when we sit at that meeting, we leave the inner critic and the invisible rucksack outside the meeting. And that's when we can be our most creative. Just like Elizabeth has said, let's be creative, have those ideas, have those conversations that we need and that we want to have. But sometimes when we're struggling with that invisible rucksack and what are they going to say, what are they not going to say, and I've got to prove myself mentality, we're not as creative as we can be. And we're really hard to be our authentic self when we're constantly thinking about others and what they think of us. So really, when we want to be our authentic self in those board meetings, really think about your inner critic and your invisible rucksack and how we can leave those behind and the message that we want to get. And ask for support as well if we need it. And then after the board meeting. Sometimes we do these meetings and we rush off to the next thing. And I get that. I really do get that in our busy lives. But what's really important is to celebrate the good things in that meeting. What did we do really well? Because we're going to do that again. What do we need support with from that meeting that didn't work so well? And it's really important as women that we do this because then we can improve the meetings going forward. And they need our voice. They need our voice during the meeting and after the meeting. And then finally, how do we get support with that? Because we're not on this journey alone. For women to be successful, for women to have that success at the board table, our allies are there to help us. And the most important ally in that board meeting is the chairperson. Whoever that chairperson is, I'm going to ask them to create the space for everybody to be able to speak and to be listened to and be really intentional about creating that space. So don't allow people to be interrupted when they're speaking. Don't allow people to take the ideas of somebody else and use it as their own. Really be intentional about stopping that behavior because that really works against women. Make sure you ask a woman first, especially a woman of color, because they're often the only ones there. So ask them first for their view. Because when we create that inclusive environment within a board meeting, we all take away those skills and then that ripples down within the organization. And talk about it. Talk about board meetings and how you've created that inclusive space and how it's helped and why it's helped. And talk about that throughout the organization because I see the board meetings as the place where we really do create the inclusive environment within organizations that we can then ripple down throughout whole organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. There was lots to think about there. It's sort of, bringing diversity, thought diversity onto a board to avoid this thing that we call the groupthink, right? Which is what boards are sort of evaluated on. Is there hegemony or is there diversity? So actually to have that confidence actually within that the diversity of thought will be welcomed. And not to be intimidated by that. So really good things to think about there. We shall now move on to Joanna. Joanna will be building on this theme of inclusion, but also acceptance by looking at emotional intelligence. And she's going to be using a tool on your screens as a visual aid. Thanks.
Thanks, Raymond. And good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you this afternoon. And it's been fascinating to be able to sit here and listening to the other panelists, because I've been thinking about what I was going to say, and there are some real themes that are coming through. And one of those is, it's so important that we celebrate who we are, acknowledge what we bring, and that everybody's journey is different, but there are a lot of similarities. Now, I've literally got about 9.5 minutes. And the things I'm going to be talking to you about, I could probably talk to you for about 9.5 hours. So I'm really going to try and get as much content in, but leave you with something to take away and think about. Now, I've been working for over 35 years. Don't know where that time has gone. I've worked in a number of industries, from banks to transportation to law firms, and I've been at CBRE now for the past 2 years. I've spent a lot of time in my career supporting really senior women in their roles in talent programs. And I really wanted to share with you a little bit about insights discovery. Now, as I say, we have limited time. There are a lot of tools out there, and you may have come across insights, but this one really resonated when I was thinking about what to talk to you about. And insights discovery, as you can see here, is based on 4 color energies. And it's never about that you are this or you are that. We are a blend of everything. However, we have stronger preferences. And when you look at these different colors, it impacts our communication and our decision making. And one of the things that I've found really interesting throughout my career is I've often been told by others what to do and what not to do. I.e., be more this, be more that, be less loud, be less enthusiastic. And the biggest thing for me is everyone's always going to have an opinion. And it's never about changing who you are, because you are what makes you brilliant and unique. But it's also sometimes about dialing up and dialing down. And for me, Sunshine Yellow is someone who is more extroverted. I get energy from talking to others, and I'm very feeling focused. However, some of the environments that I've worked in the past, I've been working with people in the complete opposite. Now, this is not about me changing, because fundamentally, I don't want to change who I am. But there are times where I have adapted. I always think about it as dialing up or dialing down. So there are days where I think, actually, yeah, I can really, really go for my energy today and dial that right up. There are other days perhaps where I've needed just to dial that down to make sure that I'm engaging with others. And I still do that today. I think in any environment, we all work differently. We all have different preferences in how we work. But when we're looking at emotional intelligence, there are a couple of elements that come back, that, especially with what Sadia was saying as well, around, there's an element around self-awareness and authenticity. And knowing what our strengths are, knowing what our preferences are, can really work to our advantage, because we can utilize that and we can use that in a whole load of different situations. There are times where I need to be more logistical. I need to think more about process. Just because it's not a stronger preference of mine doesn't mean that I can't do it. One of the biggest things for me that I'm hearing a lot of at the moment, which I'm really fascinated by is this element of human leadership. What does that mean, human leadership? And it's around empathy, it's around vulnerability. And one of the other speakers says, you don't need to know the answers to everything. And I sometimes think we put so much pressure on ourselves to think we do need to know everything. But what we do have is a wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge, and some brilliant networks that we can chat things through with. And when we're looking at the amount of opportunity out there, think about your unique selling point. What is it that you bring? And I wasn't going to quote Dr. Seuss or Cat in the Hat today, but it seems appropriate right now. And it's one of my favorite quotes. And that is, today you are you. That is truer than true. There is no one around that is youer than you. And it's about embracing that. So thinking about what your preferences are, what your strengths are, what's your knowledge, what's your experience, and what's your journey, because there will be things that you've experienced that no one else has. And as you're progressing and thinking more about those senior roles and what you bring to that, you have an opportunity to challenge the status quo. You have an opportunity to bring a different perspective. And that's how change happens. Because again, I hope I can get all this out, but if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always got. And so there is an opportunity, going back to what Sally was saying about that rucksack. How do we maybe just take that deep breath and go, actually, I am going to challenge that. I am going to try something different. And there's a real opportunity as we become more senior in our roles to be disruptive. And I mean that in the most positive way. There's a lot around human leadership and disruptive leadership at the moment. And what I would ask all of you is, what is it that I can do that makes me stand out, that makes that different? What is it that I can do that can really make an impact and change? I'm going to stop it there. I really hope the Dr. Seuss statement resonated with you, and look forward to the questions that are coming up with the rest of the panel. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Joanna. I think the key takeaway for me there was the dialing up and dialing down. So again, this is reinforcing the idea that as women, we don't need to change our authentic selves, but we can dial up or dial down. For example, we might dial up a certain coloured attribute on that wheel if we're dealing with a red, because their communication style is very, very different. And so I think that's really useful. It's not about fixing or changing our authentic selves, but really adopting slightly different maybe communication skills according to the people that we're dealing with, being a diplomat, as it were. Okay, that's super. So we have got a few questions in, and I think the chat box is also going to be opened up, so I'll have a look if we've got some questions coming through. Tanya, the first one that came in was actually more aligned to your sort of sphere. The question is, how are non-executive roles advertised, if at all? Is it effectively who you know, word of mouth?
Thank you. And just very briefly before I answer that question, I just want to say thank you, Sadia, for describing me as a recovering lawyer. I love that. And also just to refer to a couple of things that have been mentioned, that inner critic side. I have met so many FTSE 100 C-suite who are unsure, or they have 2-3 roles sitting on FTSE boards, and they're they want me for this. So it's not, reserved to those that don't have roles, for example, or don't sit on some great boards. And I very much hope that we aren't in the era of token hires. I do get asked for women for reasons of, that we need to rebalance the board, but I think the conversation has moved, thankfully, but obviously it still needs to move further. Anyway, coming back to the question I was asked, and trying not to deviate too much, are non-executive director roles advertised? Well, in annoying lawyerly form, I'm going to say it depends, which is what all lawyers say about everything, but it depends. So to give you a really good example, a role that I did recently that was advertised was for the Port of Dover, and their corporate governance setup requires that, because although they're not a public sector body, the way they're set up as a statutory corporation, they have to advertise the non-exec roles. So we had to advertise that publicly. To be honest, do we like doing it? No, we don't. And I'll tell you why. Because for the one gem that you get through public advertising, you get 1,000 people who think they can do the role and are completely unqualified and haven't read the brief. So they're not advertised by headhunters very often in a lot of circumstances, because it's not an efficient way of finding the right people, sadly. So if everybody did apply for the roles that they were appropriate for, it would work, but it doesn't. Having said that, there's a different approach for different types of roles. So if it's a public sector role, often they have to be advertised publicly. There or many roles that charities, community boards, VC roles sometimes, where they want to cast the net widely and they're happy to go through that volume of noise. And you'll find all of those sorts of roles on various job boards. I mean, there are lots of them. There's, women on boards have one. New role allow you to join and scroll through their roles and be aligned and sort of matched by an algorithm. I think there's Ned on board. There's loads and loads of job boards that have Ned roles available. So it just depends what type of role you're after. Some of them have commercial ones, but typically the commercial ones aren't advertised for the reasons that I said. And so coming to that second part of the question, is it word of mouth? Well, as I mentioned, it's a three-pronged approach. You need to have a very clear LinkedIn. You need to have a network and raise your hand up and make a lot of noise and say, I want to be a Ned, so that you're front of mind. You need to look at your own networks and go, who do I know? I know people sitting on a board. I need to get in contact with them. It's all of those things to get noticed.
Thank you. And just building on that, Tanya, and I think maybe this question is also in the chat box, and we've had it submitted on in writing. Maybe one for both of you, Elisabetta and Tanya. What are finance and operations, or numbers seem to be the desired skills? What are the chances of a governance professional securing a seat on the board?
Shall I have a go first? I'm encouraged by what I am seeing, and I feel that the modern board structure is way more balanced and way more interested in different perspectives and points of view. So if I take our board as an example, we have representation from, of course, HR and marketing and technology, but also legal. And of course, it feels very balanced in the different points of views that we are able to listen to. Remarkably, we're also 50% female, which I think my boss is probably very proud of. So I am encouraged by what I'm seeing. Ask me that 10 years ago, I'd have had a different answer.
Tanya, would you add to that?
Well, I mean, we have to recognise that, of course. Well, you have to recognise that, of course, finance is an important part of the board, because you have to have an audit chair and audit committee. So it has to be a part of the board. So inevitably, it gets a lot of focus in recruitment. But as I mentioned earlier, the multifaceted Ned is really what you want, because Elizabeth has pointed to the whole diversity of skill sets, but you can't have one in every box. So what I would say is, yes, governance professionals are needed and valued and sought, but not just for that attribute. There has to be more than that. You have to be offering more than just simply governance.
Okay. Sally, we have a question for you. In a predominantly male arena, how can the board see women as a beneficial addition and not just a diversity tick?
So thankfully now there's lots of data on this showing that diverse companies with diverse boards are more profitable. That's number one. You know, we all want more profitable companies, and diverse boards give them that. And also, just as Joanna was saying, and Elisabetta, when you have more diversity on the board, you have better ideas. You're more creative. You get permission. When other people come up with new ideas, everybody gets permission to come up with new ideas and say things in a different way, see things in a different way. And it also reflects the rest of the organization. It's really odd having a board that does not reflect the makeup of an organization, and in particular, the makeup of their clients, because clients are speaking now. They want their suppliers to reflect the way they look, because they're worried they're going to have all these suppliers, all these companies that are making the wrong decisions because they haven't got people that look like them on the board. And we've only ever seen benefits from diverse boards. So thankfully, there is a lot of reasons why diverse boards are very much the way forward. And everybody's asking for it. I don't know anybody who's not asking for it. And also, it's fair and equitable. Because if you don't have a diverse board, what are you saying to the women, to the diverse talent in your organization? You're saying, work really hard for us. Work really hard, but you're not going to have a seat at the top table. So you need to.
And I think it's been, I mean, no, that's fantastic. And it's been proven in, I think, recent financial crises that there was a sort of sort of standardization of thinking even at the top, right? And that actually there was no diversity of thought. Not that that has to necessarily come from a woman, but it could. But that was used as the sort of, and how there was no disrupting thought to penetrate that standardized thinking. And then everyone ends up being a yes man. You know, it's a disaster for the board and business. So just to build on that a little bit, we've just had a question through in the chat box from someone who is a woman of colour and wants to know about, you know, techniques to sort of tackle imposter syndrome. Sure. Which, I mean, I don't think you need to be even a woman or a woman of colour to have imposter syndrome. I think you'll find that. But I mean, I will definitely hold my hand up to that as being a woman and a woman of colour. And I've certainly had sort of situations in my early career where I couldn't really find how I fitted in. You know, I'd be like this really small, petite woman, you know, acting for the bank, walking into boardrooms, and they kind of think like, who are you? I'm like, I'm the one with the money doing the deals. But it was really strange because I didn't fit the image of what they thought their lawyer would look like, maybe, you know. And I think when you see that kind of look or impression in people's eyes, it does make you sort of go inwards to yourself and you think, oh, am I not good enough? Or, you know, whatever it may be. But what would be your thoughts on maybe techniques for, you know, all of these journeys, even if you're not a person of colour, if you're a woman or just from a different background?
Yeah, great question. And the first thing is, if you do have imposter syndrome, which many people do, first of all, it's congratulations, you're a high achiever, because it comes hand in hand with being a high achiever. So congratulations, it's a good sign. And understanding what imposter syndrome is, and I see imposter syndrome as the inner critic on steroids. That's really what it is. It's when Zelda's going absolutely mad, and we need to form a new relationship with our inner critics. Yeah, we can hear it, we can feel it, and it's uncomfortable, and it's just part of us. It doesn't dictate how we show up. We choose new thoughts. We choose a new way of how we show up. We choose to leave the rucksack. And you say, how do I leave my rucksack at the door? And you have to work on this. It doesn't happen overnight. It's something we intentionally work on. So we intentionally notice those thoughts that come from our inner critic, from our imposter syndrome. And we say, okay, this is what and I use journaling. So journaling really helps for me. So I will journal everything my imposter is saying, all those thoughts, those negative thoughts. And then I will journal all the positive thoughts. Why do they need me in that room? What have I got to offer? And we've talked about it today. What are my strengths? Because actually, if I don't go into that room, if I listen to my imposter, what happens? I stay out of that room, or I go into that room guarded and don't speak. And what happens if I listen to my inner champion? What's my inner champion got to say? Listen to your inner champion, write it down, and then you go in to that meeting or wherever you do. But you've got to work through. And after a while, you're going to get a bit bored about what your imposter says, because actually it's the same thing every single time. And so now I can laugh about it and go, oh, yes, I know what you're going to say. This, 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 and this. We've been here before. And I know exactly what my inner champion's going to say. And each time you go through that exercise, it gets easier. But don't make yourself wrong. Don't make it mean that you're not good enough. Just make it mean that you've got to go through this little process. And actually, you're a thinker and a processor, and that's going to help you.
So the takeaway there is a self-awareness. Obviously, if you're asking the question, you're registering, there's a thought process, a critic going on here. So a self-awareness, but then for all those negative things is to actually verify them. Are they true? Effectively, your positive list. And yeah, that's some good work to be getting on with. So I hope that answers your question to some degree. I've got one final question before we hit 4 o'clock. Joanna, please, if I may. What is the best self-development strategy to securing a board role to make yourself to be a standout candidate? So best self-development strategy.
Oh, and I have.
What do you suggest?
1 minute. Do you know, the biggest thing for me, and a lot of the conversations and the coaching that I do, is be really open and honest with yourself and look in the mirror. And there's something about self-awareness that where you embrace your strengths and you kind of go, right, this is where I'm going to really smash this. And then really embrace those things that you think, this is what I feel uncomfortable. And you know, that point of, you know, we talk about comfort zone where you're almost just like, I can't do it. Do it. Like, take some really deep breaths and do it. Because the biggest thing that I see with so many people is they haven't even realized how much they can achieve. They haven't even started climbing that mountain yet. But they, you know, there's that whole thing. So for me is challenge yourself. Do the things that you think you're not good at, that you don't want to do. And just actually surprise yourself. Because unless you try, you're not going to know.
Thanks, Joanna. And that brings us to the end of our Inspiring Inclusion Women on Board session. It remains for me to thank our panelists who have generously given us their time and knowledge. And thank you to all our attendees today. A recording will be made available. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.